And so Pepi probably lives a lot longer than he should. He lives to be, I think, he's the longest reigning pharaoh in Egypt. He probably lives to be 90 or 92. But archaeologists, in the height of Egyptology, they're looking for every single little thing. So of course you're going to end up looking between the two most iconic places in Egypt, which are the valley temples of the Great Pyramids. You look in between them, and all of a sudden they find this little workers' village with a lot of tools and clay pots and clay seals, pottery, all the stuff that is similar to workers' villages that they found elsewhere in Egypt, the remnants of them. And so it makes it pretty obvious what occupation these people were. Plus, this little town is right down the hill from Giza. It's literally in Giza. It's just on the outer edge of it. And they try to piece together, okay, what was this town? What evidence do we have? When did they exist? Okay, we found all these clay jars with these seals. Okay, this seal contains the cartouche of Khufu. Okay. So this little town that we found existed during the reign of Khufu. Let's see what other stuff that we can find. Okay, here's the cartouche of Khafra, Khufu's son. Keep looking through it. There's nothing in any of this that has the cartouche of Menkaura, which we think comes after Khafra. Nothing there. So the idea is that the construction of Menkaura's Valley Temple, he cleared it all out and turned this little workers' village on its head and just buried all the trash in the desert nearby the Valley Temple. He displaced it. And that's why you don't see evidence for his existence in the archaeological remains of this little town, because he just ripped up the town and threw it away because the town existed where he wanted to build his Valley Temple. So he just moved all those guys somewhere else and told them to dump their trash somewhere.
Get the fuck out.
And we found that. And we found that trash. So, you have...
When did we find that? 1800s?
Yeah, probably turn of the century, around the year 1900. That's when a lot of this stuff was found. Because Giza is torn up. I mean, I think even though there's so much left, I think it's like 90% of Giza has been excavated now. It is the center of archaeology.
Yeah.
So it's another piece of evidence that kind of locks the pyramids into a certain date. It locks that technology into a certain era. So that's the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau. That's the height of the Pyramid Age, which has taken us so long to get through. Now
it's been amazing though going through it. I really appreciate you giving it such in depth.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there were probably lots of little nuances and mysteries that we just can't address in 5 or 6 hours. Each one of these topics could take up an entire podcast. Each little nuanced thing could take up an entire podcast. But I think this is like such a treat that people get on a podcast, like a sweeping history of Egypt, because people, it just hasn't been done before. So anyways, we have now reached the other side of the Great Pyramid Age. It's kind of all downhill from here. There are other people throughout the end of the Old Kingdom trying to build pyramids, but they don't stand the test of time. They're made out of much less impressive architecture, and they crumble. And, you have the Black Pyramid, and they have basically every other pyramid. There's dozens of others that are just these minor, obscure pyramids that the stones, the foundation wasn't laid. Like, I didn't even describe that, the foundation of the stones at Giza are man-made. They're not building on just the natural bedrock. They create these large megalithic tiles for the pyramid to sit on to make sure it lasts forever.
How large approximately were those tiles?
Oh, man. I mean, they range in all different sizes. Some of them are bigger than the biggest stones used in the pyramid. But, they're limestone, but hard limestone. And so, it's probably, not a far-fetched to say that the economic pull to be able to do this, for some reason that's lost to us, is decreasing. The pharaohs aren't as powerful as they used to be. We actually do know that that's the reality, that's a reality, because as you go through all of the, you study all these necropoli throughout Egypt, these great graveyards, and you can kind of analyze, okay, in the early dynasties, the pharaohs, their whole government was made up of people that they were related to in their own family. But you can imagine as time goes on, your family members die, and you got to rely on your buddy to step in to where normally your family member, your blood, would take up that role.
Right.
Well, and imagine the trend that sets in 3 generations when the pharaoh's family is not completely in charge, and it's people who don't have an intrinsic loyalty to the pharaoh by their blood. You start vying for more power, and then people start competing with the pharaoh. and that's bad. You don't want anybody competing with the pharaoh. That's not good for stability in Egypt. And it's about right after Menkaura, the latter half of the fourth dynasty in Egypt, that more and more people start taking up places in government in Egypt and having competition in power with the pharaoh. That's never a good thing. They tried that multiple times, and all 3 times it brought about the end of Egypt, which they were barely able to scratch their way back from. So this is starting to happen in Egypt for the first time, as people starting to competing with the pharaoh, and it creates instability and more of a balance of power and resources in Egypt. Like we see high priests of Ra and other various gods getting really, really nice tombs that are comparable to the pharaohs. And all of a sudden, you have this guy who's a vizier, or he's the high priest of, X god, who has a nicer sarcophagus, a much nicer sarcophagus than the pharaoh. Ooh, there's some kind of displacement. There's some kind of displacement of power here. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's lost to us today, but there's some guy here who has something on the pharaoh. He's got the pharaoh by the balls. You know what I mean? And it's happening more and more common. The pharaoh's power is diminishing while the power of the priests is increasing. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the Old Kingdom, we have this pharaoh called Pepi II, which is not a very strong name for a pharaoh. And I've always thought about like the ceremony that's like the incarnation of the pharaoh or something, and they go, and now presenting the
Pepi II.
Pepi, it's just not Khafra, it's not something strong.
It's not badass.
It's not Ramses.
Very beta male.
Very beta male.
Yeah.
And so Pepi probably lives a lot longer than he should. He lives to be, I think he's the longest reigning pharaoh in Egypt. He probably lives to be 90 or 92. He's a similar length in reign to Ramses the Great, but not nearly as successful, because by the end of his reign, it's like Weekend in Bernie's. The pharaoh is not actually in charge of Egypt. He probably should have offed himself a long time ago or given up the throne to somebody else, because he was not in charge of. There are so many problems that were going on in Egypt that we can't name them all or decide which one that it was that brought down the end of the Old Kingdom. But Egyptian civilization, we call them intermediate periods, where Egypt is kind of knocked off its horse for a little bit and it climbs back. That does not do it justice. Egypt, as a unified civilization, ended. It literally ended. It was only able to crawl back 300, 400, or about 250 years, 350 years later. The entire civilization ended. We think it was due to drought, due to financial strain, due to invaders just sacking, these barbarians that lived out in the desert. The barbarians that finally came in, probably under a period of instability, under a very elderly king who was not, it was expected, at least as far as we know, that the pharaoh was, obviously he's in charge of the army, but not only is he in charge of the army, he's also out there with the army. When they're fighting people, it's expected that he's out there, at least through propaganda, right?
Yeah.
It's not, I guess, it's not realistic to think they're actually out there like
Alexander. He's not Mel Gibson in The Patriot going to the front line.
Yeah, but it's expected that he's very active, and that this old elderly pharaoh was not active. And so you can just imagine. You look at leaders throughout history that are basically like a corpse that's being propped up. All the people around that corpse are much more powerful in their positions than they should be.
Yes.
And that they would be if there was a young, strong person at that main role. And so you have mass amounts of instability in Egypt, and the civilization quite literally ends. And that is probably...
What year are we at again?
This is 2100 BC, the death of Pepi II. And when he's dead... we now have this period, the end of the golden age, the end of the golden days of Egypt have now finally come to an end due to instability and the pharaoh's position being challenged and ultimately toppled, which created, now you have these varying chieftains, all these high priests who think that they're in charge, and it just all falls apart because people on the peripherals, the barbarians at the gates, are waiting. They're waiting to come in. And eventually they do at the end of Pepi II's reign. So they bombard Egypt, and Egypt is gone for 300 years. And it's not until It's not until a pharaoh named it should be Mentuhotep. Look that up.
Mentuhotep?
Yeah, Mentuhotep II.
So hold on. How does a pharaoh, if they're like gone for 300 years, that's older than our country is right now?
Sure.
And meaning the pharaoh line dies, how does someone suddenly declare themselves a pharaoh?
Probably what it is, if you go to the description, so there's lots of Mentuhoteps, Mentuhoteps, Mentuhotep. Will you read the description?
Okay, I got you. Mentuhotep II, also known under his pronoun or prenom. See how I'm trained now? Prenom.
Okay. So I'm sorry. So
prenom and Nephiheptra. This isn't what you want.
No. Look up first pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom.
He was a he/they, just to be clear. All right, first pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah.
All right, Les has been on the money today.
Yeah. Thank you.
We've had him pull up like fucking 6,000 things. All right, first pharaoh of Middle Kingdom.
Mentuhotep. That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Mentuhotep
the first.
all right, copy and paste that, and let's go to his YouTube.
Yeah. Well, it's
yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
So that is the right one.
Yeah. Well, no, there's a Mentuhotep and a Mentuhotep.
That's Mentuhotep. Yeah, that's what we were on. Go down. Hit that again, Alessi. This is what we were on.
Yeah.
Mentuhotep.
Yeah. So
also known under his pronoun Nephiheptra.
Yeah, so he's the very beginning. Yeah, sorry about that. So
all good. So I'll read the description like you want it. Was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, the sixth ruler of the 11th dynasty. He is credited with reuniting Egypt, thus ending the turbulent first intermediate period and becoming the first pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom. He reigned for 51 years according to the Turin king list. Mentuhotep II succeeded his father Intef III on the throne and was in turn succeeded by his son Mentuhotep III. This is what I want to know. Mentuhotep II ascended Egypt's throne in the upper Egyptian city of Thebes during the first intermediate period. Egypt was not unified during this time, and the 10th dynasty, rival to Mentuhotep's 11th, ruled Lower Egypt from Heracleopolis. After the Heracleopolitan king desecrated the sacred ancient royal necropolis of Abydos in Upper Egypt in the 14th year of Mentuhotep's reign. Pharaoh Mentuhotep II dispatched his armies north to conquer Lower Egypt. Continuing his father Intef III's conquest, Mentuhotep succeeded in unifying the country probably shortly before his 39th year on the throne. Following and in recognition of the unification in regnal year 39, he changed his titulary to Semitawi. Okay, so hold on a minute. So effectively, Egypt in the dark periods at some point here formed multiple states within it.
Yeah.
And so one of the states had a line of pharaohs that started before him. At some point, one of them is like, yo, I'm the pharaoh of this bitch right here. Yeah. And his father was the pharaoh of this state and was trying to start to unify Egypt together. And then this motherfucker came in and said, I'm going to unify it all together, and reunified the whole country and said, I'm pharaoh of you all, call me God.
Yep. And you know what's really interesting is that first. You remember when you asked me how the origins of hieroglyphs began, and I tell you, down in southern Egypt, which is Upper Egypt, up in those eastern mountains is where they found that petroglyph that shows scorpion.
Right.
Okay. So that is Scorpion the First, who is tangentially the father of Scorpion the Second. The other name for Scorpion the Second is Narmer, which is the guy who comes from the south and conquers the north and unifies Egypt. So the son of this, former great pharaoh. The son of Intef III, which is Mentuhotep II, they also come from the same area of Egypt as Scorpion, and he marches north again and smites the king of northern Egypt and reunites it. This guy did what Scorpion II did. He did exactly the same thing. March north and put the civilization back together. Eventually they kick out all the foreigners. Like each little state kicks out all the foreigners, or they begin to do that, and which kind of reestablishes Egyptians being there. Because they all recognize that having too many people that aren't Egyptian there, your civilization is crumbling. It's eroding away. You have no foothold in your own home anymore. So these states are beginning these little kingdoms, these they're kingdoms that are run by chieftains is kind of like the word, but they all have people who are claiming to be pharaoh, right? Well, eventually one of them is going to have to be pharaoh, and to do that, he's going to have to grab the last remaining pharaoh by the hair, with the scepter and smite him and crush his skull in and say, I am the god, the human embodiment of the god, of Egypt.
That's right.
And so this guy, Mentuhotep, does it. He does it again. The second time Egypt is unified. But imagine 400 years afterwards.
Yeah, these people don't even know what their history was.
Exactly. It's a new civilization.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.